leaving the battlefield behind. Ahead lay answers, danger, and probably a very angry museum curator. But with a former warship as his partner and the symphony of battle still humming through their hull, Marcus couldn't wait to face it all. After all, what was life without a few cosmic horrors to overcome? To be continued. A stick, Sarah replied without hesitation, taking another sip of her terrible synthesized coffee. The gathered delegation of alien representatives stared at her in bewilderment. Their array of sensory organs, everything from compound eyes to electromagnetic receptors, all focused on the human ambassador with various degrees of confusion and disbelief. Ambassador HFY of the Hexapodian Collective was the first to break the awkward silence. Their mandibles clicked rapidly in what Sarah had come to recognize as their equivalent of nervous laughter. "Surely you jest, Ambassador Chen. We asked about the deadliest weapon in your species' history, not primitive tools." Sarah raised an eyebrow and set down her coffee cup with deliberate slowness. The sound of ceramic meeting the polished surface of the conference table seemed to echo through the room. "Oh, I'm quite serious. The stick, or more broadly the club, is humanity's deadliest invention. Everything else is just an iteration on the theme." But what about your nuclear devices? Your antimatter weapons? The quantum destabilizers?" This came from Representative Yalara of the Silicon Consciousness, their holographic form flickering with patterns that indicated extreme skepticism. "Impressive toys," Sarah conceded with a slight shrug. "But consider this. How many beings have actually died from nuclear weapons in our history? According to our historical records, approximately 200,000 immediate casualties," supplied Ambassador Krell of the Arthropod Federation, their antennae twitching with pride at displaying their knowledge of human history. "Correct," Sarah nodded. "Now, how many beings do you think have been killed by someone picking up a stick and deciding to use it as a weapon? From the first proto-human who realized they could extend their reach and multiply their strength, right up through history to modern times?" The room fell silent as the implications began to sink in. "But that's not a weapon of mass destruction," protested Zextral. "It's not even technology by most definitions." Sarah smiled, and several of the alien representatives felt an involuntary shiver run through their various physiologies. There was something about human expressions that still unnerved many species, even after decades of diplomatic relations. "And that's exactly why it's the deadliest weapon we've ever created," she explained, leaning forward slightly. "See, the thing about weapons of mass destruction is that they're actually terrible weapons. They're deterrents, political tools, symbols of power, but they're almost never used. They're too big, too obvious, too destructive to be practical." She gestured to the water glass in front of her. "But a stick? A club? Those are perfect weapons. They're everywhere. They're simple. They're effective. And most importantly, they're accessible. You don't need rare materials or complex manufacturing. You don't need specialized training or maintenance facilities. You just need to be clever enough to pick one up and swing it." "But surely modern weapons have killed more efficiently." This came from a previously silent member of the delegation, a representative of the Energy Beings Consortium, whose name Sarah could never quite pronounce correctly. "Ah, but that's where you're making a common mistake," Sarah replied, warming to her topic. "You're thinking about efficiency in terms of immediate body count. But the true measure of a weapon's deadliness isn't just how many it can kill at once, it's how consistently it kills over time." She stood up and began to pace, a habit that always made the more stationary species slightly nervous. "Think about it this way. Nuclear weapons have been used exactly twice in actual warfare in our entire history. But every single day, somewhere on Earth, someone picks up a stick or a club or some variation thereof and uses it as a weapon. Even in our most advanced cities, with all our technology and sophistication, people still sometimes grab a piece of wood or metal and swing it at someone else." "But that's primitive," Zixextral insisted, though their mandibles were clicking more slowly now, indicating growing uncertainty. "Exactly," Sarah exclaimed, pointing at the Hexapodian ambassador. "That's precisely what makes it so deadly. It's primitive. It's basic. It's hardwired into our evolution. Before we learned to make spears, before we discovered fire, before we developed language complex enough to coordinate hunting parties, we figured out that we could grab a stick and hit things with it." She returned to her seat, noting with some amusement how several of the delegates subtly shifted away from her. "And here's the really interesting part. Every single weapon we've developed since then, from the spear to the sword to the gun to the bomb, has basically been us trying to improve on the simple concept of extending our reach and amplifying our strength. We've just gotten more sophisticated about it. This is disturbing. Yalara's hologram flickered with patterns that Sarah's neural translator interpreted as deep concern.
Oh, it gets better, Sarah continued, picking up her coffee again.
Want to know the really scary part? We're so good at turning things into weapons that we had to develop entire systems of martial arts around defending against improvised weapons. We literally created arts of combat that assume someone might pick up a random object and try to use it as a weapon at any moment. The Silicon Consciousness Representative's hologram briefly displayed error patterns before stabilizing. You trained to defend against random objects being used as weapons? Had to, Sarah confirmed. Because humans are really, really good at turning almost anything into a weapon. But it all started with the stick. That was our first great leap forward in warfare technology. The realization that we could pick up an object and use it to hit harder than our fists alone. Ambassador Krell's antennae were now practically vibrating with agitation.
But this goes against all conventional military theory. Weapons development is supposed to progress from simple to complex, with each iteration becoming more efficient and deadly. Sarah laughed, and several delegates flinched at the sound.
That's because you're all thinking like engineers and scientists. You're looking for the most efficient way to cause destruction. But humans?
We think like humans.
We look for the most practical way to cause harm, and sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective. She gestured around the room. Look at this very conference room. I can spot at least 15 objects that could be used as improvised clubs just from where I'm sitting. That's not counting anything that could be broken off and used as a weapon, or combined with other objects to make one. The delegates immediately began looking around nervously, some of them clearly calculating distances to the nearest exit. Oh, relax, Sarah sighed, noting their discomfort. I'm not going to attack anyone. I'm a diplomat. My job is to prevent violence, not cause it. I'm just trying to help you understand something fundamental about humanity that your species seem to have trouble grasping. And what is that? Yalara asked, their hologram now displaying patterns of intense curiosity mixed with apprehension. That humanity's greatest strength, and our greatest danger, isn't our technology or our intelligence or our adaptability. Though those are all important, it's our ability to take the simplest things and turn them into tools, or weapons. We don't need complex technology to be dangerous. We just need opportunity and imagination. Sarah took another sip of her coffee and grimaced at the taste. Which, by the way, is why human diplomatic facilities have such strict protocols about what objects are allowed in meeting rooms with other species. We're not worried about protecting ourselves. We're worried about protecting you from getting the wrong idea about some human picking up a chair in frustration. Is that likely? Zexatral asked, their mandibles now barely moving.
No, of course not. Like I said, we're diplomats. We're trained to resolve conflicts peacefully. But the protocols exist because somewhere in our history, someone did exactly that. Got angry during negotiations and turned furniture into weapons. And we learned from it. The room fell into contemplative silence as the delegates processed this information.
Sarah used the opportunity to finish her terrible coffee, making a mental note to submit another complaint about the synthesizer's inability to properly replicate the taste of Earth coffee. Finally, Ambassador Krell spoke up again. This has been enlightening, Ambassador Chen. Though I must admit it doesn't fill me with confidence about human nature. Sarah smiled warmly. Actually, it should. Because the same ability that lets us turn simple objects into weapons also lets us turn them into tools. That stick that could be used as a club, it could also be used to reach fruit from a high branch, or test the depth of water before crossing, or prop up a shelter. The human gift isn't just about making weapons. It's about seeing potential in everything around us. She stood up, gathering her materials. And that's why I'm here. Why we're all here.
Because humans also figured out something even more important than making weapons.
We figured out how to make peace. We learned that just because we can turn anything into a weapon doesn't mean we should. We learned to channel that creativity into diplomacy, into trade, into cultural exchange. A rather optimistic view, given your species' history, Yalara observed.
Oh, we're still dangerous, Sarah admitted cheerfully.
Every human is potentially lethal simply because we're so good at improvising weapons. But we're also potentially wonderful allies for the same reason. We're incredibly good at improvising solutions. It just depends on whether you give us reasons to do one or the other. She headed for the door, then paused and turned back. By the way, this entire conversation, this is going in my report as a successful cultural exchange. Because now you understand something fundamental about humanity that most species miss. We don't need fancy weapons to be dangerous, but we also don't need them to be helpful. We just need to choose to use our abilities for the right purposes. As she left the room, Sarah could hear the delegates beginning to discuss among themselves. She smiled, knowing that she'd given them something important to think about. Yes, humans could be terrifying in their ability to weaponize the simplest objects, but they could be equally impressive in their ability to turn those same objects into tools for peace and progress. And really, wasn't that the most important lesson any species could learn about humanity? The next day, Sarah noticed that all the conference rooms had been subtly redesigned. The furniture was now all made of soft, flexible materials that couldn't easily be wielded as weapons. She couldn't help but laugh. They'd clearly gotten the message, even if they'd somewhat missed the point. Still, she supposed it was progress. They were thinking about human nature in a new way, even if they were still a bit afraid of it. And fear, properly channeled, could lead to respect. Respect could lead to understanding. And understanding, well, that was what diplomacy was all about, wasn't it? She made a mental note to request Earth-style coffee for the next meeting. After all, if they were going to worry about humans weaponizing furniture, she might as well have decent coffee to help her explain why they shouldn't. Besides, she thought with a grin, she hadn't even gotten to the part about how humans had weaponized words themselves. But that, she decided, was probably a discussion for another day. One potentially traumatizing revelation about human nature was probably enough for one conference. As she headed to her next meeting, Sarah found herself wondering what the delegates would make of the human habit of turning absolutely anything into a game. But that too, she decided, could wait. After all, diplomacy, like human nature itself, was all about choosing the right tool for the right moment. And sometimes the right tool was simply knowing when to stop talking about tools altogether. 2 weeks after the infamous stick incident, as it had come to be known in diplomatic circles, Sarah found herself in another interesting situation. This time, she was giving a tour of the Human Cultural Exchange Center to a group of newly arrived alien diplomats. And this, she said, gesturing to a large display case, is what we call a playground. The holographic display showed children climbing, swinging, and sliding on various brightly colored structures. The new delegates watched with a mixture of fascination and horror. They willingly put themselves at risk of falling? Asked Talith, a newly appointed representative from the crystalline matrices. Their crystalline forms sparkled with patterns that Sarah's translator interpreted as profound confusion. That's part of the fun, Sarah explained, trying not to smile too broadly at their reaction. It helps develop risk assessment, spatial awareness, and physical coordination. But those structures, interrupted Vkr'lak, a gelatinous being from the Fluid Consciousness Collective, their translucent form rippling with concern. They appear to be made of modified clubs and poles. Sarah couldn't hold back her laugh this time. I see my reputation precedes me. Yes, some playground equipment could theoretically be used as weapons, but that's not their purpose. They're tools for play, for learning, for growing. How do you prevent the small humans from utilizing them as weapons? Talith asked, their crystalline surface now displaying patterns of genuine curiosity. Sometimes we don't, Sarah admitted. Kids will be kids, and sometimes they do hit each other with things. But that's part of learning too. Understanding consequences, developing empathy, learning when and how to use objects appropriately. The delegates exchanged worried glances, their various physiologies expressing different flavors of concern. Perhaps, Sarah continued, moving them along to the next display, it would help if I explained something about human development. You see, we don't become dangerous because we have access to potential weapons. We become dangerous when we don't learn how to properly interact with our environment and each other. She gestured to a new hologram showing a historical timeline of human tool use. Every tool we've ever created can be used for harm or help. A stick can be a weapon, yes, but it can also be a crutch to help someone walk, or a lever to move heavy objects, or even just something to draw pictures in the sand with. But how do you choose? Vkr'lak's gelatinous form wavered with uncertainty. How do you decide what purpose to use these multi-purpose objects for? Sarah smiled, but this time it was gentler, more thoughtful. That's the real question, isn't it? And the answer is both simple and incredibly complex. We choose based on our needs, our values, and our understanding of consequences. She led them to another display, this one showing various human martial arts practices. Several delegates flinched as they watched humans practicing with staffs and other wooden implements. Look at this, Sarah said, pointing to a particular sequence. These humans are learning to fight with sticks, yes. But they're also learning discipline, respect, and control. They're learning when not to use these skills just as much as they're learning how to use them. This is most perplexing, Tilith observed, their crystalline surface refracting light in patterns of deep thought. You teach combat to prevent combat? Exactly, Sarah beamed. Now you're getting it. Humans are paradoxical that way. We learn about violence to prevent violence. We explore our capacity for destruction so we can better choose creation. She moved them along to yet another display, this one showing human children in a classroom. Watch this, she said, pointing to a young girl using a pencil. That simple writing implement? It could be used to stab someone, but instead she's using it to write poetry. The same tool, two vastly different potential uses. The difference isn't in the tool, it's in the choice. But how can you trust? Maxval's form rippled with agitation. How can you ever be certain that the humans around you won't choose the destructive option? Sarah's expression turned serious. We can't. Not completely. That's what makes trust so powerful. It's a choice we make despite knowing the risks. Every time humans interact peacefully, we're choosing to believe in each other's better nature. She led them to a final display, this one showing scenes from various human peace treaties and diplomatic meetings throughout history. Look at these. In every one of these scenes, humans who could have chosen violence instead chose peace. Not because we couldn't fight, but because we decided not to. Is that why your species joined the Galactic Council? Tilith asked, their crystalline form now showing patterns of dawning understanding. Partly, Sarah nodded. We wanted to show that humans could be trusted with our capabilities. That just because we can turn anything into a weapon doesn't mean we will. That we understand the responsibility that comes with our particular talents. She gestured around the Cultural Exchange Center. This entire facility exists to help other species understand humanity better. Yes, we can be dangerous. Yes, we can improvise weapons from almost anything. But we can also create art, music, literature, and technology that enriches lives. We can turn our tendency to see multiple uses for objects towards solving problems and helping others. And the soft furniture in the conference rooms? Maxval asked, a ripple of what might have been humor moving through their gelatinous form. Sarah grinned. Well, sometimes understanding takes time. And if making the furniture soft helps other species feel more comfortable while they learn to trust us, that's fine. Trust is built in small steps. As they continued the tour, Sarah noticed something interesting. The delegates were starting to look at the displays differently. Instead of just seeing potential weapons, they were beginning to notice the tools, the art, the innovations. They were starting to understand that humanity's gift for improvisation wasn't just about finding weapons. It was about finding possibilities. And really, she thought, that was the most important lesson of all. Because in the end, humanity's greatest weapon wasn't the stick, or even our ability to turn anything into a weapon. It was our ability to choose not to see beyond the obvious use of things, to imagine better possibilities. As she wrapped up the tour, one final question came from Tilith. Ambassador Chen, given humanity's versatility with objects, what do you consider your greatest creation? Sarah didn't hesitate. Language, she said. Because with language, we created something that could hurt worse than any stick, or heal deeper than any medicine. We created something that could start wars or forge peace, and we chose, more often than not, to use it to understand each other. The delegates fell silent, their various physiologies processing this new perspective. And Sarah smiled, knowing that slowly but surely, they were beginning to understand that humanity's real power wasn't in our ability to make weapons, but in our ability to choose what we make of the world around us. After all, she thought, wasn't that what made humans both terrifying and wonderful? Not what we could do, but what we chose to do with what we could do. Sarah's reputation as the stick diplomat had spread far beyond her original intention. 3 months after the initial incident, she found herself being specifically requested for what the Galactic Council termed sensitive cultural interpretation missions. Today's mission was particularly interesting. She was mediating a discussion about allowing human children to attend the Galactic Federation's prestigious Academy of Sciences. Absolutely not, thundered Representative Cracks of the Silicon Hive, their holographic form crackling with agitation. Have you seen what they do with simple laboratory equipment? Sarah maintained her diplomatic composure, though she couldn't quite hide her amusement. Perhaps you could be more specific about your concerns? They modify everything! Crax's hologram flickered intensely. Last week, a human child visiting the academy took apart a quantum spectral analyzer and turned it into what they called a kaleidoscope, supplied Dr. Martinez, the human education advisor sitting next to Sarah.
And if I might add, it was a rather brilliant demonstration of optical physics.
It was a violation of equipment protocols,
Krax insisted. It was innovation, Sarah countered smoothly, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is exactly what the Academy of Sciences is supposed to encourage. The gathered representatives shifted uncomfortably in their various forms of seating. Ambassador ZX Trowell, who had been present for the original stick incident, clicked their mandibles thoughtfully. Ambassador Chen does have a point, they offered. The human tendency to repurpose objects has led to several significant scientific breakthroughs in recent years.
Breakthroughs? Scoffed Krax. They turned a molecular reorganizer into a food preparation device. You mean the molecular gastronomy lab? Dr. Martinez grinned. That project won 3 innovation awards and revolutionized food preservation technology across 4 sectors. Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious despite her internal amusement. I think we're dancing around the real issue here. You're not actually worried about equipment modification. You're worried about predictability, or rather, the human lack thereof. The room fell silent. Sarah had hit the proverbial nail on the head, and everyone knew it. Consider this, she continued, pulling up a holographic display of her own. Here's a standard Federation problem-solving assessment. When presented with a maze, most species follow one of 3 established solution patterns. The hologram showed various paths through the maze, color-coded by species. Now here's what happens when humans attempt the same maze. The hologram shifted, showing a chaotic array of different approaches, including one that involved ignoring the maze entirely and going straight through the walls. That's exactly the problem, Krax exclaimed. They don't follow proper protocols. No, Sarah corrected gently. They don't follow expected protocols. There's a difference. Humans don't ignore protocols because they're rebellious or destructive. They ignore them when they see a better way to achieve the goal. Dr. Martinez nodded, pulling up his own data. In fact, our studies show that human children are particularly good at this kind of lateral thinking. They haven't yet learned to accept artificial limitations on problem solving. Artificial limitations? This came from a previously silent representative of the Quantum Consciousness Collective, their energy form pulsing with curiosity. Yes, Sarah explained. Like assuming a maze must be solved by following the paths. That's an artificial limitation. The actual goal is to get from point A to point B. The paths are just one suggested method. But the paths are there for a reason, Krax protested.
Are they? Sarah asked mildly.
Or are they there because that's how it's always been done? Because that's what everyone expects? Human children have a wonderful ability to question these assumptions. She stood up and began pacing, a habit that still made some species nervous, but which they were gradually getting used to. Let me tell you about something that happened on Earth centuries ago. A teacher asked her class to determine the number of fish in a picture. Most students counted them one by one. But one child simply asked, "How many fish did you draw?" That's cheating. Krax's hologram flickered indignantly. That's efficiency, Dr. Martinez corrected. The child found a faster way to get the correct answer. They questioned assumptions and found a better solution. And this, Sarah added, is why human children would be an asset to the Academy. Yes, they'll probably take things apart. Yes, they'll use equipment in unexpected ways, but they'll also see possibilities that other species might miss. Ambassador Zekistral's mandibles clicked rapidly. Like seeing a stick as both a weapon and a tool? Sarah smiled. Exactly. But more importantly, like seeing it as neither and both at the same time. Humans, especially human children, have this wonderful ability to see things not just for what they are, but for what they could be. She gestured to the room around them. Look at this chamber. Most species see a meeting room. Humans see potential. Those acoustic panels? They could be modified to create amazing music. The gravity generators? They could be adjusted to create the galaxy's most interesting playground. The quantum field stabilizers? They could probably be reconfigured into the best light show you've ever seen. But that's not what those things are for, Krax insisted, though their hologram was showing signs of uncertainty. Says who? Dr. Martinez asked quietly. Who decided what these things are for? And more importantly, why should that decision be final? Sarah nodded approvingly. That's the real gift humans could bring to the Academy. Not just our ability to repurpose things, but our ability to question why things are purposed the way they are in the first place. The quantum consciousness representative's energy form pulsed thoughtfully. You are suggesting that human unpredictability is actually beneficial? More than beneficial. It's essential, Sarah replied. The galaxy is full of problems that can't be solved by following established protocols. Sometimes you need someone who'll look at a stick and see not just a weapon or a tool, but 100 other possibilities no one has thought of yet. She sat back down, noting with satisfaction that the representatives were showing signs of serious consideration rather than outright rejection now. Besides, she added with a slight smile, think about it this way. Would you rather have human children learning to explore their creativity in a controlled environment like the academy or figuring things out on their own? The room erupted in various expressions of alarm as the implications of that question sank in. I move to approve human admission to the academy, Zextrel said quickly, their mandibles clicking rapidly. With appropriate supervision, of course. Seconded, added the quantum consciousness representative, their energy form pulsing with what might have been amusement. Even Krax's hologram showed patterns of resignation. Perhaps we could start with a pilot program? Sarah managed to keep her expression neutral, but inside she was grinning. They were learning. Slowly but surely they were beginning to understand that humanity's unpredictability wasn't a bug, it was a feature. As the meeting wrapped up and the details were being finalized, Dr. Martinez leaned over to whisper to her. You know they're going to regret this when the first human kid turns the quantum physics lab into a roller coaster, right? Sarah whispered back. Bold of you to assume it'll take that long. I give it a week before someone figures out how to turn the cafeteria synthesizers into a zero-gravity food fight machine. They both suppressed their laughter as the other representatives filed out, already discussing modifications to their equipment safety protocols. You know what the funny part is? Sarah mused as they gathered their materials. They're so worried about human children breaking their equipment that they haven't even considered the real danger. Oh? Yeah, she grinned. Wait until they discover human children's most dangerous weapon of all, the question why. Dr. Martinez winced sympathetically. Should we warn them? Nah, Sarah replied, gathering her things. Some things they need to learn for themselves. Besides, a little chaos is good for the soul, even silicon-based ones. As they left the chamber, Sarah couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this was how humanity would make its greatest mark on the galaxy. Not through our technology or our strength or even our ability to turn anything into a weapon, but through our children's endless capacity to look at the universe and ask, what if? After all, she thought, wasn't that the most human thing of all? 2 months into the Academy's Human Integration Pilot Program, Sarah found herself standing in what had once been the quantum physics laboratory, the operative word being had. They turned it into a musical instrument, Professor Xylon stated flatly, their crystalline form vibrating with a mixture of awe and horror. The entire laboratory. They somehow converted our quantum harmonic resonance chamber into what they're calling what was it again? A quantum theremin orchestra, supplied Lisa Chen, age 12, looking entirely too pleased with herself. We found out that if you modify the quantum field oscillators and sync them with the harmonic resonance patterns, you can create music that exists in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Sarah pinched the bridge of her nose, fighting back both a headache and a smile. And how exactly did you discover this, Lisa? Well, we were studying quantum superposition, Lisa explained enthusiastically. And Jamie mentioned how it was kind of like music, with different states existing until you observe them, like notes waiting to be played. And then Maria remembered reading about how ancient humans used to think there was music in the spheres of the universe. And we thought, what if they were right? What if we could actually hear quantum states? Professor Xylon's crystalline surface showed patterns of reluctant fascination. The methodology is surprisingly sound, they admitted. They actually managed to create a way to perceive quantum states through auditory interpretation. We can see the music too, chimed in Jamie Rodriguez, age 13, from where he was adjusting something that looked suspiciously like it had once been part of a particle accelerator. If you route the quantum visual feed through the holographic processors, you get these amazing patterns that change based on the quantum state of the notes. Sarah watched as the air above them filled with swirling geometric patterns that shifted and flowed in time with the eerily beautiful music emanating from the modified equipment. She had to admit it was spectacular. And the best part, Maria Patel, age 11, added excitedly, is that we think we can use it to explain quantum mechanics to younger kids. See, when you can hear and see the quantum states,
It's much easier to understand how they work. Professor Xylon's patterns shifted to what Sarah had learned to recognize as their equivalent of a resigned sigh.
They've already scheduled demonstrations for the junior physics classes, they explained. And I must admit, the preliminary results are promising. Students are showing a 47% improvement in understanding quantum concepts when they're presented through this musical interpretation. Sarah carefully maintained her diplomatic expression, though her eyes twinkled. So what you're saying is, by completely disregarding proper laboratory protocols and equipment usage guidelines, these human children have accidentally created a revolutionary educational tool. Not accidentally, Lisa protested. We had a hypothesis and everything. We just didn't exactly ask permission first because we weren't sure it would work. It's easier to ask forgiveness than permission, Jamie quoted sagely, then wilted slightly under Sarah's stern look. I mean, we should definitely have followed proper procedures and submitted a formal proposal first. Sarah hummed non-committally, then turned back to Professor Xylon. I assume you'll want the laboratory restored to its original configuration? The crystalline professor's surface rippled with complicated patterns. Actually, the Department of Quantum Physics has submitted a formal request to maintain the current configuration. It seems several of our leading researchers are interested in exploring the potential applications of this quantum musical visualization system. Sarah couldn't quite hold back her smile this time. Oh, do tell. Initial observations suggest that being able to hear and see quantum states might have applications beyond education, Professor Xylon explained, their patterns showing increasing excitement despite themselves. We're detecting subtle quantum variations that our traditional instruments missed entirely. It's possible that this unorthodox approach might lead to new insights into quantum mechanics. Plus, Maria added brightly, we figured out how to play Never Gonna Give You Up across 11 quantum dimensions simultaneously. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. You quantum rickrolled the physics department? The whole academy, actually, Jamie said proudly. Turns out quantum entanglement makes for amazing surround sound. Professor Xylon's patterns showed what Sarah was pretty sure was suppressed amusement. Yes, that was unexpected. Though I must admit, the mathematical principles involved in translating a two-dimensional sound file into quantum-entangled multidimensional audio were quite impressive. And this, Sarah gestured to a complex arrangement of modified equipment in the corner. What is this part for? Oh, that's the quantum dance floor, Lisa explained. We figured out how to translate physical movement into quantum state changes, so you can literally dance with quantum particles. We're calling it quantum choreography. Sarah looked at Professor Xylon. Quantum choreography? The crystalline professor's patterns shifted in what was definitely amusement now. It's actually quite brilliant. They've created a way to physically interact with quantum states through movement. The educational applications alone. Well, we've had more students volunteer for quantum physics studies in the past week than in the previous 3 cycles combined. Because it's fun, Maria insisted. Everyone always talks about quantum physics like it's this super serious, complicated thing. But really, it's kind of like a dance. Everything's moving and changing and interconnected. We just made it easier to see the dance. Sarah watched as Jamie demonstrated, his movements creating cascading patterns of quantum probability waves in the holographic display above them. The corresponding music shifted and flowed with his motion, creating a symphony of sound and light that was somehow both deeply mathematical and beautifully artistic. You know, she said thoughtfully, when we convinced the council to allow human children into the academy, this wasn't exactly what we had in mind. Are we in trouble? Lisa asked, though she didn't look particularly worried. Sarah laughed. Quite the opposite, I suspect. You've just demonstrated exactly why human creativity is so valuable, and so terrifying to some species. You looked at one of the most advanced quantum physics laboratories in the galaxy and thought, you know what this needs? More music. And dancing, Maria added helpfully. And dancing, Sarah agreed. More importantly, you found a way to make one of the most complex fields of study more accessible and engaging. You took something designed for one very specific purpose and reimagined it completely. Like a stick? Jamie asked innocently, and Sarah strongly suspected she was being memed at by a 13-year-old. Yes, like a stick, she agreed dryly. Though I have to say, turning a quantum physics lab into a musical instrument is a bit more sophisticated than picking up a branch and hitting things with it. Same principle, though, Lisa pointed out. Taking something and using it in a way nobody expected, finding new possibilities. Sarah looked at Professor Cylon. She's not wrong, you know. This is exactly what we were talking about in the council meetings. Humans don't just think outside the box, we question why there's a box in the first place. The crystalline professor's patterns showed thoughtful agreement. Indeed, though perhaps in the future, we could establish some guidelines about consulting with faculty before completely reconstructing laboratory equipment. We did leave detailed documentation, Maria protested.
And backup copies of all the original configurations, and we made sure everything was reversible. Very responsible, Sarah noted.
Though perhaps next time, consider running your ideas past your professors before implementing them. The three children shared a look that Sarah recognized all too well. It was the universal expression of kids who were absolutely going to do something like this again. Just maybe with better plausible deniability next time.
At least warn me first, she sighed.
So I can have my diplomatic responses prepared when you inevitably turn the stellar cartography lab into, I don't know, an interactive zero-gravity theater or something. The sudden guilty shifts in their expressions told her everything she needed to know. The stellar cartography lab? She asked wearily. Really? We had this idea about three-dimensional interactive storytelling, Lisa began. Using star positions as dynamic set pieces, Jamie continued. And we figured out how to use the gravitational mapping systems to create floating stages, Maria added. Sarah looked at Professor Zalon. I don't suppose you have any quantum-grade headache remedies in what's left of your lab? The crystalline professor's pattern shifted in what was definitely amusement now.
Actually, the children discovered that certain quantum harmonic frequencies can help alleviate neural stress. Would you like a demonstration? As the lab filled with soothing quantum-harmonized music and corresponding light patterns, Sarah couldn't help but laugh. This, she realized, was humanity's true superpower. Not our ability to turn anything into a weapon, but our ability to turn anything into something wonderful, even if it did occasionally give galactic safety inspectors nervous breakdowns. To be continued.